Sahil, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We are so excited to have you. I think you've done a really great job with your book in terms of talking about the journey of going from having a corporate career. I think a lot of us can relate to doing what's considered the right thing, going to a good school, doing the good corporate job. You were VP at a private investment firm, you worked in private equity, and then you realized that there were other types of wealth out there and that it isn't just about saving up lots of dollars in the bank account and, when is really enough. So I'm really excited to talk about the 5 different types of wealth today with you. I think you've made some really amazing insights. But before we get there, I always love to know a little bit about the person and their story. So do you mind taking us to your childhood and letting us know what your first experience with money was like? What were your parents' views on it? Did it affect you, or did you kind of have your own idea?
Yeah, I grew up, and this is actually an interesting place to start and actually quite important. So I'm glad you asked. I grew up in a town outside Boston that was known for being filled with a lot of people who worked in finance. So a lot of my friends' parents were like bankers or hedge fund managers, very, very wealthy. My dad is a professor, so we were, middle class. We never like wanted for anything, but we were not well off relative to a lot of the people that I grew up around. And I remember my first real recognition of that so clearly, which was my best friend as a kid was probably the most wealthy kid in all of town. He was like, his father was extremely, extremely financially successful. And he used to fly around on a private jet and had all these houses. And I was really envious of all of the things that he had. Like he had all the best toys, all this space, he had the best sports equipment. And it's so interesting to reflect on now because we would hang out in the afternoon and then he would have a private chef prepared meal by himself in front of the TV. And I would go home and have dinner with my parents and with my sister all around the table all together. And I never questioned whether my definition in my mind of him being rich and us not being rich was correct, or if I really wanted that, if that's what rich was. It was just something that I feel like what you're like slowly indoctrinated into, this idea that money is what defines a wealthy life. And so it's so interesting for me now to kind of wind the clock forward to where I am and to this mission that I'm on to redefine what wealth looks like and what it means to all of us, because I can trace its roots back to those early fundamental moments.
You wouldn't go home and look at the food that your parents prepared on the table and flip the table and be like, this is not the life I want.
I mean, I really was like, I really remember feeling envious and not thinking about the fact that maybe eating by yourself in front of the television every single night over and over again is not something that feels good long term. And it took me so many years. I mean, when I think about my own life, I chased all of those definitions of success that we get indoctrinated into. I mean, for the first 7 years of my career, worked in the world of finance and investing in a private equity fund. I was getting promoted. I was getting the things that people tell you should want. And as I got more and more narrowly focused on money being the path to me living a good life, I really lost sight of everything else. I was like winning the battle, but losing the much bigger picture war of these other areas in my life. And that experience is what sparked me to recognize that the scoreboard that we have, the way that we measure our lives, the way that we measure our worth, is fundamentally broken or at least incomplete.
Do you feel like there were external pressures of, the people around you? I'm assuming, based on where you've grown up, where the status symbols were perhaps the ways that people proved that they had wealth, or those were the things you wanted to obtain. Do you think there was a part of you that thought, well, if I also have the home plus the beach house plus the boat, that I'll be happy? Or did you kind of early on look at those experiences and go, I know these people? Because I think you've had quite an interesting insight where you've seen and met and hung out with people that have quote unquote had it all, but you also know them personally and see that they also have their own struggles.
Yeah, I do think that status is often a very environmentally dependent thing, meaning if you live in New York City or Los Angeles, it's going to be really hard to opt out of those status games that people play because everyone around you is comparing their lives on the basis of how expensive their kids' private school is, how many nights they spend in the Hamptons every year, how many charter flights they can take. I mean, it really becomes the way that people are trying to accumulate the respect and admiration of their peers. They think that they can buy that. And unfortunately, what you learn over time is that you cannot buy the real status that you're looking for. You cannot acquire it. It is not an acquirable asset. It has to be earned through building real things. But I do think it's cultural. Like, I think exactly what you said, which is, as I spent more and more time in worlds where people did measure their lives around those things, I started measuring my own life around those things. And I wanted the nice house, or I wanted the nice car. And it's not that anything is wrong with those things, it's that you need to recognize when you are buying those things for the sole purpose of impressing others versus because they make you happy. And like, I have this test in the book, I call it the bot status test. You ask yourself, would I buy this thing if I couldn't tell anyone about it? If I couldn't show it to anyone, or if I couldn't take a picture of it and post it anywhere, would I still want this thing? Because often what you find is that you're buying these fancy things, doing these things solely for the benefit of other people, to try to make them be impressed by you, rather than because they're actually bringing you any level of intrinsic enjoyment.
When you say that, I think of the Birkin that I bought, because would I buy that bag if no one knew it was a Birkin? I actually don't know, because it is just a bag. But when you have something that you can, like, hold up and be like, oh, this is what I have. Do you have an example of, when you were working and you're doing all these long hours and you want to show or have something that, made you feel like you had grown your wealth or you'd reached a certain status? Did you have an example of a Birkin?
Yeah. I mean, my example was like taking fancy, expensive looking photos at like nice hotels. So my wife and I, I'd spend more time trying to take a cool picture that would make it look like I was doing so great in life than enjoying the actual experience in the moment of being there. And with the Birkin, it's an interesting one because that could also make you feel very good about the fact that you earned that. And so you need to distinguish those two, because sometimes, like, doing all this hard work and earning something and feeling like, oh, I can afford this thing that I've always really wanted, that can make you happy just seeing the bag. You see the bag and you're like, oh, I earned that. I feel really good about that. So you do need to give yourself credit and a little bit of leniency on some of those things. But it is a good question to ask yourself when you're going to go buy something. Like, how much of my life am I just living for the benefit of others? Like, to try to impress other people that frankly aren't even thinking about me. Because the one thing that you learn over and over again is that no one is really thinking about you. Everyone is just walking through life thinking about themselves. And if they do think about you, it's short lived, because then they're just moving on to whatever their problems are. So if you spend your whole life trying to spend money, trying to accumulate these status symbols to try to impress others, well, at the end of the day, being impressive to other people is overrated. Being impressive to yourself is what really matters.
That is such a great way of summarizing that point. I think it gives you such an important way to look at, okay, if I want to buy this item, is it for me and is it for other people? I want to also talk about the 5 types of wealth that you have put so well into your book. You've done such an amazing job. But for those that are listening and going, to me, wealth means having a high income. Sahil, thank you for this book, but I want to have the job. I want to have the status. What are the other types of wealth that are important to consider? And I'd love to, go through them one by one with you.
Yeah, the first thing I will say is that financial wealth is one of the 5 types of wealth. It is a very important one, and I will never, at any point in the book, tell you that money doesn't matter. That you should give up your worldly possessions and go live in the Himalayas, sipping warm broth and meditating for 12 hours a day. If you want to do that, by all means, but I won't be joining you. I like having money. The point of the book is that money isn't nothing. It simply can't be the only thing. Your wealthy life may be enabled by money, but in the end, it's going to be defined by everything else. We need to learn to use money as a tool, not the goal. And these other 4 types of wealth, which I'll walk through, are where we really need to think expanding our scoreboard so that we can build a life that is comprehensively wealthy across all of these areas rather than narrowly just across the one. So the other 4 types of wealth that I talk about in the book, the first is time wealth. This is all about freedom. Freedom to choose how you spend your time, who you spend it with, where you spend it, when you trade it for other things. It is fundamentally about an awareness of one thing, which is time as your most precious asset, as the one thing that you can never get back. Social wealth is the second one, all about your relationships, the few close, deep relationships, and then the broader circles of connection to people that extend beyond the self. The third type is mental wealth, all about purpose. It's about growth. It's about creating the space necessary to actually wrestle with some of these bigger, more unanswerable questions in your life. And then the fourth type is physical wealth, which is all about your health and vitality, actually taking the controllable actions to fight the natural decay that you go through with age. And then of the five types of wealth, the fifth type is financial wealth, which we've talked about. And the specific nuance to financial wealth that I really want people to come away from the book with is understanding that your expectations are your single greatest financial liability. If you allow your expectations to rise faster than your assets, you will never feel wealthy. And so, understanding what your definition of enough really looks like, really having a clear picture of what that life looks like to you, so much good comes from that on your journey.
You talk about like being a time billionaire, and I remember reading that and going, I've never heard that term before. What do you mean by that?
So the concept of time billionaire, I first heard from an investor named Graham Duncan. And he conceptualized it by these interviews that he was doing with all of these people looking to join his firm. So he was interviewing all these young people that were thinking of joining his investment firm. And what he noticed was that all of them had one thing in common, which is they all wanted to become billionaires. And what he explained is that they are all billionaires in one very important way, which is in time. A billion seconds is about 30 years. So when you're 20 years old, you have about 2 billion seconds left on average in your life. When you're 50, you have about 1 billion seconds left in your life. This is a recognition that time is actually your most precious asset. But when you're young, you don't relate to yourself that way. You don't think of the fact that you are rich in time. And so the question that I love to ask people is, would you trade lives with Warren Buffett? He's worth $130 billion. He has more money than God. He flies around on a Boeing business jet. He has access to anyone in the world. Sounds pretty great. But you wouldn't trade lives with him for one very important reason. He's 95 years old. There's no way that you would agree to trade the amount of time he has left for all the money in the world. And on the flip side, he would do anything to be in your shoes today, to trade all of that money to be your age. So you recognize in asking that question that time has quite literally incalculable value. And yet, on a daily basis, how much of it are we wasting? How much of it are we sitting around scrolling nonsense on our phones, comparing ourselves to other people, stressing about the past, anxiety over the future, all of these things that are fundamentally sacrificing and giving up that one thing that we truly have that has so much value?
What would you say is someone that has, like an example of someone that has a lot of time wealth, an example of someone who day to day you can look at and go, they're actually quite poor in time wealth? Because when we look at financial wealth, it's maybe easier to determine, do you have the money in your bank account? Yes or no. But with time, what is your definition of they've got time wealth?
The ability to choose. Time wealth is fundamentally about freedom. And if you choose to deploy your time into tons of pursuits to build your business and do all these other things, you are still time wealthy, even if you are now busy and working on things. It is just the fact that you were actually in control of that decision. You were a time maker in that sense and not a time taker from other people. You were in control at the driver's seat. This is a really important distinction too, because people say money is freedom. That's like a common thing that people always say, money equals freedom. That's not true. That is just a lie. Money does not equal freedom. Well-used money, well-designed, thoughtfully used money can create freedom, but money does not equal freedom. I have plenty of friends who might make $10 million a year. They are not free. They are stuck on a treadmill of having to do that exact same work in order to feed the lifestyle that they've built up. So if they decide they hate what they're doing, they're actually stuck in the job because they need the job to fund this lifestyle that they've built up. That is not freedom. You don't have the freedom, even though you have all the money in the world. So we need to actually break that in our minds and recognize that you will be free when you prioritize freedom, when you design your life for freedom. not just when you have a bunch of money.
You could almost like rephrase it instead of saying money equals freedom. Maybe it's like income producing assets equal freedom.
Yeah, income producing assets that allow you to step away from needing to put your time into these things that are generating, for sure. And the other piece is expectations. Avoiding expectations inflation really creates freedom, because for someone that is making more and more money, but their expectations, their expenses, the things that they're spending money on, have continued to rise at the same rate. Well, you just have to keep making more and more money in order to feed that expectation monster that you have in your life. And if you're making $10 million a year, but you're spending 10, you're fundamentally not going to feel wealthy. You're just going to feel like you're stuck on this treadmill.
You speak really highly of this idea of social wealth as well, and kind of you've got a beautiful graph that looks at the different amounts of time that you spend with different parts of family members or friends or your colleagues. Do you mind talking a little bit about what social wealth is?
Social wealth is all about your relationships. It is fundamentally, I think, the one type of wealth that is so important to have, because if you don't, it is very hard to enjoy any of the other types of wealth. Like, no one dreams of being on a yacht by themselves, or sitting on a private jet by themselves. You want to do it with the people that you truly care about, that you're around. And social wealth, scientifically, is enormously important for how well we age. The Harvard Study of Adult Development is this amazing study done over the course of 85 years. They followed the lives of 2,000 participants. They found that the single greatest predictor of physical health at age 80 was relationship satisfaction at age 50. Not your blood pressure, your smoking or drinking habits, or your cholesterol, but how you felt about your relationships determined your life, health, and outcomes. And that is so essential to understand, especially for younger people out there, to recognize that investments in your relationships are actually the single greatest investment you can make. Because those are the things that are going to compound in the same way that any financial investment does. The tiny investments in your relationships today stack up over long periods of time.
A lot of our listeners are probably at the stage where they've either met their partner or they're looking for a life partner. What would you say? Sorry, this is not a dating podcast, obviously, but what would you say, if you were speaking to a younger sister that you had or a daughter that you had, what would be the traits that you would encourage them to look for in a partner so that, they do have this sort of social wealth over time?
I think the most fundamentally important trait or thing here is to focus on growing in love rather than falling in love. The social media age has convinced us that life and relationships and love are all about the falling, which is what you see on social media. It's the manicured, beautiful, perfect photos, the filtered images, all of the highlight reel of life. The reality is that most of life is just sitting on the couch doing nothing. You have to find someone that you're happy to do nothing with, like someone who you are truly going to be willing to sit in the mud with, to struggle with, to have the hard conversations with. That is the growing, not the falling. And so, unless you are able to flip that switch and recognize that you have to find people that you want to grow in love with, that you have to focus on the growing, that is where the true deep bonds are found in life. Scientifically, the shared struggle is what releases oxytocin. It creates feelings of love and connection. It's a chemical in our brains. So embracing that shared struggle, embracing the hard conversations, embracing sitting in the mud with someone, that is where you find those deep relationships, romantic or otherwise.
Do you have examples, maybe it's your own relationship or people that you've seen that have shown the benefits and you go, oh my God, anecdotally, that person has really good social wealth versus maybe an example of someone that, over time you saw didn't?
I mean, my own life, I think, is an example of this. My relationship with my wife is a real example of someone who I've been with. We started dating when I was 15, she was 14. And we've grown together across different seasons of life, through ups and downs, through struggle. She's been there for me, with me. We've been there together. And the depth of our connection as a result on the other side is incredible. And it's such an important thing to internalize, because we live in this era where it's very easy to press the eject button on relationships. Like, you have at the touch of your phone, thousands of options in front of you. It's like the paradox of choice. More options, but people are less satisfied with whatever option they take. And what you find is that if you press the eject button too quickly, you actually don't go through enough of the struggle to build the depth that exists on the other side. And so to more and more people out there, that is kind of my advice, is just like embrace some of that struggle that exists in relationships, because a lot of times that struggle is actually what breeds the depth.
Oh, I really like that. I think you've done a really good job of explaining that. And it kind of leads perfectly into the next type of wealth. So we've talked about time, we've talked about social. What about mental wealth or mental health? I think it's a interesting one. And I'm really curious to understand your perception on what makes someone wealthy in that category.
So mental wealth, I think, is most well understood through the lens of purpose. And this is a really important concept because a lot of people will tell you that the worst thing in the world is being on a bad path. And I actually disagree. I think the worst thing in the world is being on a good path that isn't yours. Because the bad path screams at you every single day to get off of it. You know, when you're on a bad path, that like there's all of these forces pushing you, that you got to make a change, you have to do something. But the good path that isn't yours, there's a lot of reasons to stay on it. There's a lot of people telling you, patting you on the back to stay on that path, but you know, you're the only one that knows that it's not really for you, that it's not a fit. And having the courage to step off that path, to go walk down your own, to go carve your own, that is what mental wealth is about. It's about taking the daily actions to invest in your purpose, to uncover it, to pursue your curiosity, to pursue growth, in order to uncover those things that are going to allow you to feel like you have a truly distinctive place in the world, that you are on your path, not someone else's, that you've chosen your mountain rather than defaulting into the one that was handed to you.
Do you feel like that was your personal journey?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this entire book it's not about me, but it is a manifestation of my journey, in the sense that I was climbing all of the mountains that everyone tells you to climb. And I was furiously climbing them as fast as I could. And I hadn't taken a single second to ask myself the question of whether or not I actually wanted to be on the mountain that I was climbing, whether or not I actually cared to be at the top of the mountain that I was climbing. We get, as a culture, especially young people, so obsessed with speed. We live in this speed-focused culture where everything is about how fast can I get to there? How I need to make this much money by this age. I need to get Forbes 30 under 30. I need to get all of whatever these things. It's all about speed, 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 speed. And what you learn as you get a little bit older is life is much more about direction than speed. It's so much better to climb slowly up the right mountain than it is to climb fast up the wrong one. And that only happens when you can stop and pause and ask yourself, do I actually want to be on this mountain that I'm climbing? Is this my mountain, or have I just accepted this from other people telling me I should want it?
Firstly, nothing wrong with being a Forbes 30 under 30. I'm kidding. I do think it is worth hearing your story. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about what it was like when you decided, or when you realized it sounds like, the golden handcuffs idea, where you are working somewhere, everyone around you, your parents, your family and friends, you go to a wedding and everyone's like, oh, what do you do? And you're like, oh, I work in private equity. I'm a vice president. Like, that sounds like the perfect life. And you can afford to do all these things. And from the outside, it looks like you are wealthy in all aspects of your life. How did you go from accepting, because it's scary, it's not easy, having all this effort you've put into creating a life that you maybe realize isn't the life for you? How did you decide, okay, I'm going to take the plunge and, move into things that I'm more passionate about?
So I spent the first 7 years of my career chasing all of those things, and rather successfully. I was doing the things that I was supposed to do on the surface. From the outside looking in, it probably looked like I was winning the game. And unfortunately, along that journey, as I grew more and more narrowly focused on the one thing, all of the other things started to fall apart. And it started with my relationships. I wasn't seeing my parents ever. They were getting older. My relationship with my sister had really ground to a halt. My wife and I were struggling to conceive at the time. That was creating strain in our life. I was drinking 6, 7 nights a week. I mean, I was like mentally and physically feeling a burden. So all of these other areas of my life had started to show cracks, while on the outside looking in, it was like I was winning the game. And I just started to have this sensation in early 2021 that if this was what winning felt like, I had to be playing the wrong game. And it all came to a head for me in May of 2021. I went out for a drink with an old friend, and he asked how I was doing. And I told him that it had started to get difficult living so far away from my parents, who were getting older, living on the East Coast. And he asked how old they were. And I said mid 60s. And he asked how often I saw them. And I said about once a year at that point. And he looked at me and said, okay, so you're going to see your parents 15 more times before they die. And in that one moment, I realized that if I didn't make a change, I was going to end up in a place where we didn't want to be. And the next day, my wife and I had a very candid conversation about what we actually wanted to build our life around, what our true north really was, what we wanted our center to be. And within 45 days, I had left my job. We had sold our house in California, and we had moved across the country to live closer to our parents on the East Coast. And that one decision was the spark. That was the catalyst that changed everything, because it was a step off the path, and it was a rip the Band-Aid off, jump out of the plane, hope the parachute is packed well type moment. But it was necessary, because I knew in that moment when I heard that math relayed back to me that the life that I actually wanted to build was not on the other side of the path that I was walking.
As someone that has bought a home like 8 houses down from my parents, I have to say I completely relate to that journey. And it is not easy to admit that, yes, what I'm doing on one hand is bringing financial wealth, but you're missing out on spending time with your parents. You're missing out on having a closer bond with your siblings. It is very difficult, but it's amazing that you were able to figure that out and to build social wealth for yourself and build mental wealth for yourself. You also talk about physical wealth. And I think I can assume physical wealth is about, going to the gym, being fit, being strong. But do you mind explaining it more in depth for those that don't quite understand it and look at it as at a more sort of overall superficial level?
Yeah. Physical wealth is fundamentally a catalyst for everything in your life, because when you take action on your health and you can see and feel the impact, you remind yourself that you are in control, that you have the power to take an action and create a desired outcome in your life. That belief and that understanding that you are in control has ripple effects into every other area of your life. And that is why I believe physical wealth is so powerful. Obviously, we all want to age well, we all want to be healthy, but it is also just because of that ripple into these other areas that we need to invest in this. And physical wealth is this area where you've been told that it has to be super complicated. Social media has told you need to have the fanciest workouts, diet, recovery protocols, all of these things in order to be healthy. And the reality is that it's just the boring basics across movement, nutrition, and recovery that will get the job done and get you 90% of the benefit in these areas. So those three, I would say, movement, just move your body for 30 minutes a day. It doesn't matter if it's walking, biking, hiking, jogging, dancing, rowing, whatever you like doing, move your body for 30 minutes a day. Nutrition, just eat whole unprocessed foods at about 80% of your meals. That's like 17 out of 21 meals during the week. And then recovery, just try to sleep 7 hours a night. If you can do those three things consistently, you're getting 80-90% of the benefit in this domain, and you can work your way up from there. But if you start at the boring basics, you won't intimidate yourself at the outset, and you'll actually get started and build momentum.
If you had to summarize the week of someone that has wealth in all 5 areas, from time, social, mental, physical, and obviously, financial wealth, what does that perfect week look like? Or maybe, if you had to describe your ideal week, how would you fit it in if you had complete freedom over your schedule?
So I think that this is an important point, because the perfect week is entirely up to you. What you prioritize or focus on during any one season of your life is entirely within your control and your design. So in your 20s and early 30s, I think it's super advisable for you to focus on financial wealth and building that foundation, really leaning into that, because the compounding engine, as we all know, is the most powerful force in the world. Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world for a reason, because if you can start that early, you'll be well set up for financial independence as you get older. But as you get into your 30s, 40s, 50s, you may want to lean in more to your social wealth. You may have young kids and you want to prioritize time with them during those young years. So being able to sort of play with the different levers is really how I think about this. You want to think about these different areas of your life as existing on dimmer switches. So one can be turned up and then the others can be turned down, but not off. Because anything above zero compounds in these areas. Tiny investments in your health or in your relationships compound positively. But what you need to avoid is turning these switches off in any of these areas of life.
I really like that because when you talk about the different types of wealth, you start to imagine like, oh my God, within a week, I have to do things that I want with my own time, and I need to eat well, and I need to go to the gym, and I need to visit my aging parents, and also like do really well in my career. And then, God, I should probably meditate. And it becomes so overwhelming that you don't do any of these, but to focus it as this, lever-based idea makes it seem a little bit less daunting.
Yes, exactly. I think that's right. And I think, look, that is a central concept at the very outset of the book, which is to say, probably one of the most important concepts is to recognize that anything above zero compounds. So we know that with financial wealth. Everyone that's listening to this is well attuned to that idea when it comes to their money. Putting away $50 today is better than zero because it's going to compound into your future. The same rule applies to these other areas. So even if they're not the primary focus, even if you're in your 20s and you're really focusing on your career, you can do some tiny daily basic to continue to move your relationships forward. Send the text to the person, call your mom for 2 minutes, get the group of friends together once a year. The tiny little thing continues to move positively. Same with your health, same with your purpose. All of these areas of life, the tiny daily investment is better than nothing. And for ambitious people, we allow optimal to get in the way of beneficial. We say, like, I don't have an hour to work out, so I'm just not going to work out. Or I don't have 2 hours to do focus work, so I'm not going to work. And the reality is that we need to get out of that mindset and back into this idea that anything above zero compounds.
What do you think is the biggest mistake that people make when they're considering all different 5 types of wealth? Is there something that you've come across as you've, continued to advocate for this, as you've been on other podcasts or talked to other people? What do you see as a constant theme that people get wrong about the 5 types of wealth?
The constant theme I hear is that people think that their days need to be perfectly balanced. And it creates a lot of stress and anxiety to think that. The concept of balance has been hijacked. You've been told that to be in balance, every single day needs to be the perfect mix. Like we were talking about, the perfect mix of personal life, health, family, work, space for yourself, whatever, that it needs to be that way. And if it's not, you need to start stressing out that you're out of balance. The reality is that balance is about the seasons, not about the days. So you may have a season of unbalance that you just need to put your head down and grind through in order to get to the season of balance on the other side.
Do you see that a lot with your own journey or with other successful people that you know? Do they really focus on like one season, one thing? Like this month is just career, or this month is, focusing more on my family?
I think so. I mean, I think it's the seasons of sprints, like the short sprints. I mean, I just went through this with this launch of this book. Like 3 months, I was like on the road a ton, out in the world, because I really care about it and it matters to me. I don't want to be away from my young son and wife as much as I was, but it was an important pursuit with the knowledge that now we can come back and reset. And I've been at home the last few weeks and we're home and we're all together. And so I think that mindset is liberating and important because it allows you to just lean into things when you need to really focus and sprint with the knowledge that there are more seasons to come, that wave is going to end.
I think you've summarized it in such a great way. And you've managed to talk about all these different ways of, improving our lives and being productive, but also in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. I think it's so important to remind people that it isn't something that you need to incorporate every single day. And for those that are going, okay, you know what? I'm really into this. Sahil, where can we find you? Where can we learn more about you? The book is everywhere. It has reached New Zealand. I've seen it all over bookstores. It is in the States, at Barnes & Noble, like anywhere you find books. So besides the book, where can we find your content?
Well, you can find me at Sahil Bloom on any major platform. And then I write a newsletter that I send twice a week, which you can find at sahilbloom.com.
Amazing, Sahil. Thank you so much for joining this podcast. There have been so many great nuggets of gold. And before we let you go, if you had one final thing to say to someone that wants to improve their wealth, what would it be?
Ask yourself what you truly want in life. What are the things that you truly care about? Not what the world has told you to care about, not what your friends say, not what social media says, but what you truly care about. And then go take one tiny action to build your life around those things.
I love that. I'm going to book some plane tickets. I'm going traveling. I'm in. Thank you so much, Sahil.
Thank you.